Hello folks, this is Mr. O'Brien and welcome to the video quiz for Key Concept 6.1. Period 6 covers the years 1865 to 1898. And again, this video quiz is intended to be kind of an overview of the period of sorts. So let's get started. 6.1, the rise of big business after the Civil War in the U.S. encouraged massive migrations from Southern and Eastern Europe and urbanization. The immigrants moved to the cities. It sparked government and popular efforts to reshape the U.S. economy and the environment, and it renewed debates over U.S. national identity, meaning there was a continued backlash over what it meant to be an American. Some big idea questions. What was the relationship between business and the government? What were reasons for migration for people coming here within the country? What were their reasons for moving within the country and coming here from Europe? And in what ways did the South change and remain the same? And that would be a change and continuity over time question. Alright, Roman numeral 1 for 6.1. Large-scale production accompanied by massive technological change, expanding international communication networks, and pro-growth government policies fueled the development of a Gilded Age, marked by an emphasis on consumption, marketing, and business consolidation. Alright. So when we say a Gilded Age, what we're talking about is, think if you were to take like a cheap trinket around the house, something real cheap, like you put a quarter in the 25-cent machine at Kmart, and you get like a aluminum ring out of it, and you spray painted gold, and it looks expensive in gold now. That's the Gilded Age. On the surface, in the 1890s and the turn of the century, society looked gilded, looked great. We were amassing immense amounts of wealth, yet if you just scrape beneath the surface a little bit, it wasn't so nice. Alright, so that's the Gilded Age. Alright, 1870s to about 1900. And remember that coincided with the rise of big business and smokestack factories, the modern day factory, immigration becoming the laboring class, and so forth. Alright, so the Gilded Age was a term coined by Mark Twain. It's marked by an increase in industrialization, what we would call the second industrial age in the United States. Many things, as I said, appeared to be good on the surface, but many problems were below. It was spray-painted golden. Also during this time, you have government subsidies for transportation and communication systems, kind of a continuation of that internal improvements. So the government would provide money and land to the railroads, just give them land. They could either use it to build tracks on, or they could sell it for capital investments. So the effect of subsidies would open up new markets in North America. Farms would develop around these railroad tracks. You'd see mill towns popping up. They would, mill the wood, and the railroads would be used to transport it. So towns would follow the building of these railroads and would open up new markets. And then eventually cities would develop along these railroads. Alright? And a redesigned financial and management structure. First of all, this rise of big business was accompanied by a rise in the management class. Think back to the Lowell video where you saw Obadiah overseeing the Lowell girls, the Lowell workers. Well, now, since we're all a lot of us are being pushed into the factory, you see a big growth of this management class. Everybody has several bosses, so to speak. Power is going from the shop floor up to the office up in management because you're losing your skill, so you're losing your power over your shop floor conditions. Alright, so you're seeing a rise of managers and assistant managers and mid-management. Since the owners are in absentia, not in the factory, just own it. They were the investment capital. Alright, you get day-to-day bosses that become management. And that begins to rise, starting in the 1880s and 90s and turn of the century. You also have something called monopolies, where as these businesses were getting larger and larger, they tried to gain control over their market. All right, pools, trusts, and mergers. These are all ideas that we're going to go over in another video quiz in more detail. But remember, they are all in an attempt to gain control over your whatever industry you happen to be in. All right. And it was to maximize exploitation or usage of resources and your labor force. You also began to see the rise of what's called scientific management, where management, people who were the bosses, would time the workers. and figure out what the best shovel weight was, shovel size, and so forth, to maximize efficiency, the scientific management of the labor force. All right, so Roman numeral I continued. Businesses and foreign policymakers looked outside U.S. borders to gain influence and control in markets. For example, Hawaii. Think of the Dole family. All right, we annexed Hawaii at the behest of the Dole family in the 1890s, beginning in the 1890s. All right. The Philippines, which we gained after the Spanish-American War, was a huge source of resources. And the decades of warfare in which we put down the Filipino rebellion, we finally granted them their independence after World War II. I think it might have been June 1st, 1946. I know it was 46. The fight against the Filipinos was actually bloodier than the Spanish-American War, in which the war was where we got the Philippines. We're going to get to that during this unit. Again, this is an overview, but it's enough to know for now we were looking outside the United States for resources and to expand capitalism. Also, in 1899, we wind up with the open door policy in China, where basically all these big nations, the United States and Germany and France and England, agreed no one will colonize China, but we all get our special little city in China called a sphere of influence, and we all get to trade with them. It's an open door. Imagine other countries having their own, sovereign territories within the United States. That's kind of what was happening there. Remember this for U.S. too, and eventually when you get to Pearl Harbor. And we turn our attention to Latin America, Puerto Rico, for example, and further south, American-owned sugar plantations down there. So we are really spreading ourselves. We are joining that imperialism game, which, again, we will go into in much more detail in this unit. Again, trust and holding companies meant to try and control the industry. A holding company or a trust become very powerful business organizations that control many aspects of industries. All right, a trust that was developed, for example, by Rockefeller. Several companies would sell their shares and be under the control of one executive board. So it was kind of like maintaining your own identity as your own company, but acting as one big company with other companies. All right. And there was a paper trail. I mean, you had an actual paper agreement. A pool was kind of the same thing, but there was no paper agreement with it. It was more back, behind closed doors type of thing. All right. So how did business leaders defend their status? They were being looked at as overly greedy by some people. How do they defend themselves? Social Darwinism. Basically, what Darwin argued about the natural world, that natural selection. Remember, survival of the fittest was not his phrase. Charles Sumner, who eventually argues for social Darwinism, that was his phrase. That, as the old story goes, the short-necked giraffe will not last because he or she cannot reach the tall leaves, yada yada. And Charles Sumner said, you know what, let's apply that to people. And let's apply that to social and economic organizations, the way we organize ourselves. And what that means is, if you're rich, hey, you were the most intelligent and adaptable. You were ready to adapt. If you were poor, it's your own fault. You wouldn't adapt. You were not the fittest. Survival of the fittest. So what does that mean? The rich are better, and you can't help the poor, because if you do, you're messing with nature. All right? So let's move on. This also became, the Gilded Age became the time period of conspicuous consumption. People were buying and buying and buying, and you began to see the American ethos, way of life, was becoming that of consumption. We were no longer to be virtuous. We were no longer to save money, to be free. We exercised our freedom in our habits of consumption. It didn't really become, just like race wasn't a full-fledged notion until the early to mid-1800s, consumption is not yet fully formed, but it's beginning in the Gilded Age. All right? And remember, you also have the conspicuous consumption of the elite, the wealthy, juxtaposed with the poverty that you see in the cities and society. And throughout this unit, or during this unit, you will see, like Jacob Riis, for example, was a reformer, a progressive reformer, that went around taking pictures of, quote, how the other half lives, was the name of his photo book. And it was taking pictures of New York City residents in just dire straits and extreme poverty. So you had these two things juxtaposed with each other. Extreme wealth and extreme poverty. So the wealthy encouraged cities to spend a lot of money on museums, libraries, etc. And they built for themselves elaborate houses, they had elaborate clothing, etc. They were to show off their wealth, their superiority. Now, those living in poverty often lived in tenement houses, and there's actually a tenement museum in New York City. All right. Oh, let's go back to that. I wanted you to see that. That would be a picture of how the other half lives right there. Picture of New Yorkers living in poverty. Again, Jacob Riis right there, top left, How the Other Half Lives, a book he published in 1890. All right.